Welcome to the Naavik Gaming Podcast, where it is our mission to explore the business and future of video games. We bring together the industry's brightest builders, investors, and thinkers to keep a pulse on current events, dissect emerging trends in games, share lessons learned, and have a great time. This podcast is also part of Naavik's growing ecosystem, which ranges from free and premium research to consulting and advisory services. For more information, visit www.naavik.co. Now, let's jump into the episode.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Naavik Roundtable. I'm your host, Devin Becker, and with me today, of course, I have fantastic guests. We got Manu, co-founder of Naavik here, making his comeback. Tammy Levy, Chief Games Officer at Captain TV, and David Kaye, President of Snapshot Games. And Manu's coming back with a little bit of a surprise.
Yeah.
What did you have cooking there, Manu?
Yeah, I guess the cooking is done. So, but yeah, last time I was on the podcast, I mentioned that, there's a baby on the way. So in the meantime, the baby is now here. Tomorrow she'll actually be turning 7 months. Sorry, not 7 months, 2 months or 8 weeks. And her name is Emma Scarlett Kumar. There's a long backstory about why like the two names Emma and Scarlett. Maybe I can explain that over a beer with people, but
we expect an article on it.
Yeah, like a full deep dive. Yep.
It's a lore of Manu's baby.
The child decon.
Yeah. But yeah, it's been great. Like everything has basically changed since she arrived, and it's my fourth week after paternity leave, but I'm still trying to find the balance between a new balance between work and life. But yeah, I mean the one positive thing is with her around, it's actually so much easier to put a hard stop to work now. So otherwise,
someone else to blame it on.
Yeah, I just start feeling guilty. She's there and she's smiling, and I'm just not there to see it or keep making her smile. So it's great. It's absolutely great feeling.
Awesome. Well, congratulations, of course, and welcome back.
Yeah, thank you.
We got some great topics today, of course. Lots of exciting things always happening, especially in the world of earnings. We got some stuff on Sega and Rovio continuing to talk about their strategy. Playtika and Stillfront put out their earnings, which should be interesting. Pokemon Go and some revenue debacle, maybe, going on with that. And Sony and Microsoft and their kind of competitive state of things. So let's just get kicked off with Sega and Rovio and what they've been talking about.
Yeah, this is like more of a quick update. After the whole deal went through, and yeah, a lot of I guess most of the industry was also surprised with Sega actually went ahead and purchased Rovio. I guess just to kind of recap what actually happened over there, or why the deal makes sense, at least from their perspectives. I mean, Sega basically needs a mobile business. I think their entire mobile business, about 80-85% of their revenues are all coming from Japan. So there's a huge opportunity for them to make it a more international mobile business, and Rovio can kind of bring that to the table. So it's pretty clear in terms of why this deal makes sense for Sega. Rovio, on the other hand, I mean they have a stable business. We kind of discussed it on previous podcasts. And I mean, sure, they lean pretty heavily on this one IP, Angry Birds, but it's a stable business. It keeps growing. It generates the cash that they need, and it's there. But Rovio wants more than that, more, and probably even more than just a games as a service business, and leaning more in the direction of cross-platform and transmedia. And and Sega kind of brings those IPs to the equation that potentially Rovio could leverage. Plus, these other business opportunities, like the Sega Sammy as an entity, kind of with the resorts and the toy business and things like that. Like a lot of that stuff are things that we've also seen kind of Rovio explore in the past, and those. So they kind of meet on these points. But I guess, yeah, most importantly, for me, it felt more like a real good culture deal, because it's also pretty clear. Like something interesting that I found was, or that I learned was, Sega actually started their conversations with Rovio in June of last year, which is actually much before Playtika made the bid. So it's actually possible like word got out and then Playtika made the bid. And I think most of the industry thinks that Playtika started the whole bidding or like the whole conversation about acquisition for Rovio. But yeah, the reason I say like it's kind of a culture deal is because this conversation actually started that early. And yeah, both businesses kind of think about like building games as a craft, rather than maybe a more Playtika mindset of, okay, the game is a product and then we're just going to like juice the lemon, like squeeze the lemon as much as possible for the longest period of time. But yeah, I guess for like my one question with the whole thing was, it's pretty clear, like it's a good deal for Sega, as I kind of touched upon earlier. But it's a little cloudy to me whether like is it like really a good deal for Rovio at the end of the day, because that feels like that feels like more dependent on these hopes and dreams of, okay, we're going to like reutilize Sega's IPs and make something, we're going to go cross platform, we're going to like explore a transmedia strategy. And then there's the whole question about like uh, having like Japanese overlords now, basically. And there are people who have said like good and bad things about working with just like that culture of working with a Japanese entity. So I wanted to kind of get your guys' take, more from the Rovio side. Like, do you, do you guys think it's also a good deal for Rovio? And like, do you have any insight on like how it is to kind of work with Japanese companies and teams, and whether that will work for Rovio?
That's an interesting question, and I think I could jump in. Just my quick take is, of all the potential acquirers for Rovio, like there's there's a handful of acquirers, and as you mentioned, a lot of them are very, very focused on much more, min-maxing the live ops free-to-play game, versus Rovio that has taken a lot more of the craft approach, and not necessarily like min-max every single way, like the unit economics of everything. So from that point of view, if they needed an exit strategy, if they were looking for a acquirer, it makes sense to have, a company that A, doesn't have quite the mobile expertise, and B, will kind of align on those development philosophies, because they don't have the mobile expertise. So they're not coming with, preconceived notions of how they should be optimizing their business. But at the same time, there is kind of like that interesting piece on how is it going to play out long term if Sega is actually looking at Rovio for Rovio to take the lead on their mobile strategy, or are they going to, struggle with understanding the mobile space and the mobile economics? And of course, there's also another piece to it, which is the cultural piece, as you mentioned. So I think that I hadn't thought about the cultural piece as much, because we're seeing like so many, international basically mergers at this point,
Yeah.
where it feels like a much more global just way of operating games than ever before. But I think it is also something to just watch out for and see, how do they integrate long term.
Yeah. Maybe to like focus my question a bit, and I don't know, maybe David has like an opinion on this. Like, I mean, like Rovio has, the Angry Birds IP, and it's and Sega, like they have all the experience with the toy business and the resorts and the arcade machines and whatnot, and all of that stuff is probably easier for Rovio to plug into with their IP. But when from Rovio's angle, if one of the key if one of the key selling points of kind of getting acquired by Sega was Sega's IP and like working on that IP to convert it into mobile titles or whatever. Like how I just don't know, like how do how do the Japanese entities think about or like how protective are they about the sanctity of their IP, like keeping that sanctity when other teams are kind of creating games on top of those IPs.
So, okay, so there's, I guess, two questions there. One is kind of which way is this flowing more, right? Is this more about, because it's actually pretty easy to see. There's some compatibility, I think, between Sega's success taking Sonic and moving it into other areas. They've been reasonably successful with that. And Rovio, actually, I think the Angry Birds movie, from what I recall, was not incredibly well reviewed, but it certainly performed quite well, I think. And so you're right. It's actually pretty easy to see how there could be quite a nice opportunity for Sega to take out the Angry Birds IP and do all sorts of things with it. I can't, as far as the what they will be allowing Rovio to do with Sonic. Historically, I would say Japanese companies have not been known for being incredibly easy to work with from that perspective. I will say that Sega has. I know a little bit about the relationship between Sega Japan and Sega Europe. So Sega Europe is really effectively a publisher. Quite focused on strategy titles, so they've the Creative Assembly is their big studio there, Total War and so forth. And they're, from what I understand, like they are, maybe this isn't apples to apples because they're not really working much with Sega's IP, so maybe it's a different question, but they've been given quite a long leash. And the reason, frankly, has been, they have performed. They've been quite a significant contributor to Sega's profit margins. Actually, Sega has multiple lines of business, but the software is by far the most has by far the best margins. So there is a sense to which if they're paying a decent price for this business, they're going to. I think I would imagine they're going to give them some latitude, because otherwise, why are you spending the money in the first place? But I'm speculating. I don't have any real insight here.
No, that's good context anyway. Just I've just never been exposed to that Japanese developer ecosystem, or just the mindset of kind of working with companies there. But that's good insight regardless. That's pretty much what I've heard also, right? Like, there's some level of inflexibility with the IPs, and kind of letting go of them a little bit when other people are developing games based on those IPs. Yeah,
I guess I'm wondering on the reverse side of that too. Like if Rovio's been just stuck with Angry Birds as their IP for so long, and I mean Sega kind of is not stuck with Sonic, but obviously has Sonic as like a pretty iconic one. Like, is Sega then maybe able to help Rovio launch a new IP to be able to expand out a bit? Because of course Sega has its own audience. They can maybe help for penetration in Japan, which of course is a very mobile first demographic in a lot of ways. So I do wonder if that could be a big help for Rovio to be like, hey, we want to expand outside of Angry Birds finally. Maybe now we have some leverage and support to do so. Like, is this an opportunity for them to do that rather than just being like, let's just both sit on our existing IP?
Yeah, no, that's kind of like where I was coming from with my point about one of the reasons why this would also make sense. This deal would make sense for Rovio because it basically gives Rovio access now to Sega's IPs, right? Sonic being one of them. I mean, there's Total War, there's Persona. There are like quite a few. So yeah, I mean, that's definitely an opportunity. It's just now it'll just be a question about like how these two entities actually work together, because I mean those IPs are also IPs they've reached IP status because there has been some sanctity kind of kept intact for all the games that have been built on those IPs, and yeah, pretty sure they don't want to lose that, and yeah, it'll be a new equation, new working relationship with Rovio, and I guess we'll just have to see how it goes.
Yeah. I think we'll definitely be keeping an eye on both of them, right?
Yeah.
As always, but I think it's a good opportunity, and I think a synergy that both teams were happy with, from what I heard. So I think that overall is positive, because we definitely see some more hostile M&As happening, and so this is nice to see one where everyone's happy, and that maybe the Playtika thing, it's best that didn't work out.
Yeah.
So it's good. But speaking of companies that like to do acquisitions, and Playtika themselves, we've got some interesting earnings reports that came out.
Yes, and by interesting, I would say boring earnings. So yeah, we had a couple of earnings reports go out last week. One was Playtika, the other one was Stillfront. Both of them pretty boring, stable kind of quarter. Also, especially on the Playtika side, very much in line with their forecast and guidance for the year, which it's good news that Q1 is in line with their forecast, because otherwise it would be like real trouble. So I'll go through it fairly quickly just to give everyone kind of just an update on where these two companies are at, in both of them being very much portfolio driven through acquisitions. I don't think there's a ton to discuss here, but I'll just highlight kind of the key points. So on the Playtika side, very stable quarter. One of their keynotes in their earnings was it just made me laugh, because basically the takeaway for me was like, oh, live ops work, cool, because they saw strong results from content packs and promotional features around events like the Super Bowl and Valentine's Day and St. Patrick's Day celebrations. I was like, cool.
What is the
and AI? Did you see the AI note?
Yeah, that was the next note I was going to make. Is that's the other interesting point that they highlighted, was that for their Bingo Blitz game, they've started to use AI, and it's funny because they kind of underplayed it. It was just like a little note in there where they were calling out that they used AI to help identify new segments of players, kind of potential top players earlier in their journey, to make sure you retain and convert them early on, and they're seeing an uplift off of those efforts. So I thought what was very interesting out of that is, are we going to start seeing more and more AI callouts in these earnings reports, and how do those influence how we're perceived?
I have an opinion on this.
Yes, go for it. Because the rest is boring.
The answer is, can I swear on this podcast? I forget.
Yes, you can.
All right. Well, the answer is fuck yes.
Yes.
This is. I don't know if are you guys watching? Are you guys watching Succession? Anyone else watching Succession at the moment?
No.
Oh. All right. Well, we're going to have some listeners who are. So, for apologies to my fellow hosts, but this is a very much a Living Plus moment. They're going to start hearing a lot of mentions of this in earnings calls. This is definitely
like how it happened with blockchain, like a year back, right? So yeah.
Big shoes.
You got to pay lip service to whatever the buzzword is, right? Otherwise, no one pays attention to your earnings calls.
But honestly, man, like,
and honestly, go for it, man. Sorry.
I just want to say, but honestly, I feel like the mood around AI is just so much more productive versus the mood around the Web3 stuff.
Who's pushing back? Oh no, it's bad for the environment, or whatever other excuse, right?
Yeah. So I mean, when Playtika said, okay, they are using AI, but then they kind of also attached it to the personalization aspect of it. That was still interesting, and that does feel like something tangible, like other teams could potentially replicate. But but yeah, also like Playtika does have the resources to invest in that versus other teams.
Well, now everyone has to say they're doing it though, although it'll look like they're slacking.
Yeah, especially the public companies. But anyway, Tammy, sorry. Yeah.
No, that's what I was gonna say. It just feels like much more tangible and it feels much more impactful. And you can, even with that small note that they made around AI to help identify players, like that is something that a lot of companies have been doing with data, and it really is just the evolution of how we use data for live ops, from just collecting data to reacting to that data. There's been a lot of like machine learning prototypes and platforms that have tried to precisely do this, like identify players and segment them earlier and earlier. So none of this is new. And I think that's probably why it was kind of underplayed a little bit. And they, before would have been like, oh, our optimization processes, da. And now it was like they put like the AI label on it. But it'll be interesting to see, for additional optimizations and for, teams trying to leverage AI in different ways, and not necessarily just like, player journeys, etc. And like basically like machine learning evolution of what we've already been doing. But, when you're starting to talk about, seeing lines maybe of like, hey, cost reduction, we improved our operational costs because we've been able to automate X, Y, and Z through AI. And that means, we can have a smaller team doing live ops for this game. I think that's where, it's going to start being less of a small note and a lot more of, the bigger news on AI.
Yeah, probably like one of the reasons it was also a small note was because, it was only attached to Bingo Blitz. And I said, I think they said like it was something like a 2.53% increase in revenue attributed to that. I kind of hope like all of it is like because of the personalization, efforts, because personalization as a topic in game development has also kind of been around forever, right? But it never has taken, it's like major root in operations for anybody. And I hope like that 3% kind of, moves to like even a 30%, over the course of the next couple of years. Because that would make it like really more than a footnote, in their reports. And I would personally just love to see like, personalization systems kind of, just grow more of a foothold in the industry, especially also in this post IDFA context when you basically are flying blind on the acquisition side of things. But once they're in, then you can, personalize and, kind of move that 3% to a 30%, hopefully. But yeah.
Just as a quick follow-up question on the earnings, then I wanted to find out if you think Playtika suspending doing new games was like the right move given what their earnings look like now.
I think it is the right short-term move. Like my take is it's the right short-term move because they're stabilizing the company, stabilizing their revenue, being able to stabilize their costs. At the same time, the question is what comes next, right? Like they're going to want to see growth. They're going to need to show growth. So where is that growth going to come from? Are they not confident that their existing teams can deliver on new games? Then are they just kind of going to double down on the acquisition strategy that has worked out for them and for a lot of other of these companies that have become aggregators of a lot of game studios? So I think it's short term. The answer is probably yes, but we'll see how it pans out if they can't secure additional growth via new games. Not right now. Additional acquisitions, and like what are the companies that would be open for being acquired by Playtika, and that Playtika can actually secure.
I don't think like Rovio gave Playtika a good look anymore now. So I really don't know like what's going to happen, but But yeah, I mean that was kind of my question too. Like, where does Playtika really go from here? Because sure, like, it's all like, I mean, yeah, maybe they're like building building stability right now in this post IDFA climate. But I mean, it's also like maybe a little bit too stable, and it's not really going anywhere. And yeah, at least for me, it just comes down to the new games. So.
Yeah, and then on the acquisition side, I mean, you kind of mentioned it. It's a little joke of like Rovio didn't give them a good look, but honestly, like part of it is they have been really good operators in terms of reducing costs and being very aggressive about canceling projects, closing unprofitable studios, or studios that moving operations to places where they could be more profitable. But they're like ruthless operators in that way. So as a team and as a game studio that might be approached by Playtika, if you're not amiable to that, you're not gonna even open the conversation with them, because what it looks like to be acquired by Playtika.
Yeah. I was definitely like half joking, because there are enough number of teams also out there who like the way Playtika operates, and it would be a great fit. It's not always about the craft for all game developers.
I mean, you make it sound like if you're just having trouble firing people, just get acquired by Playtika and they'll do it for you.
I didn't say
we need to cut costs, but we're too nice. Let's just have Playtika do it. Bring in the axe, guys.
And speaking of acquisitions and aggregators, we can jump into the next one for the earnings reports. See, I'm learning on the transitions here from Devin. So yeah, the other one that came out was Stillfront. Similarly, nothing controversial or unexpected. Takeaways, no new acquisitions, no new game launches. They continue to have a huge portfolio of games, global games. I think it's north of 70 at this point, even with the ones that they've shut down in the past few quarters. Their revenue has been steady. Again, it's good to see that Q1 is like in line with our expectations, because otherwise things would be rough overall. The strongest part of their business right now is their 4X strategy games, and not on mobile. So their line of the Supremacy games, Empire from the Good Game Studio. They did see, and this was kind of like the one interesting note also that I took away from it, users decline in their casual bucket of games. So they bucket their games in 3 groups: strategy, simulation, action, and RPG, and then casual and mashup. For their casual bucket, that's where they saw DAU and MAU decline. And I kind of looked into it a little bit and was reading up a little bit on what drove that. And basically, the news is actually from Q4 of last year, and they're just seeing the effects right now in Q1, where one of their offices in Bangladesh, their Bangladesh office, the studio was called Ulka Games, which was part of Moonfrog, which makes poker and rummy, and I forget, they have another like multi-game game. So this studio, Ulka Games, published the adaptations of the poker and rummy game in Bangladesh, kind of a localized version. And Bangladesh came in with very restrictive measures and very targeted towards Stillfront, where they expanded their definition of illegal online gambling to just virtual chips. So they basically came after them. Stillfront decided to close down operations just to not have to deal with these like very tight and strict regulations that were really being targeted across the board, but they got targeted here as well. So shutting down those operations and the game did not have material impact on their revenue. It was more of like a DAU and MAU basis where they saw kind of that impact them. So that I thought that was kind of an interesting just effect of, you know, decision to close the studio at the end of last year. They're seeing kind of that effect on their user base, their global user base, you know, going into this year. I guess outside of that, yeah, it's steady as it goes. I found it very interesting how they're grouping their games, but that's just me. I was like, man, your casual simulation mashup sounds like you're just like putting games together so that you can say like these buckets are all like relatively stable and like they cancel each other out when they're like up and down versus like an actual like something that makes sense. But that was just like an interesting. That was like interesting. I was like, how is a Hollywood Stars, Big Farm Mobile, Harvest, and I think like another more mid-core game all fall into like simulation action RPG, and then the Property Brothers, Trivia, Poker, Rummy, etc. fall under casual mashup, and how are they not in different groupings? But
I mean,
anyway.
it's all about like that public, like what narrative is going to like, you know, keep the public markets happy. But
yeah, and it sounded very much like I was like, oh yeah, they want to say like they're aggregating games in a way that makes each bucket look, you know, relatively stable. But yeah, I don't know if you guys have any other thoughts around Stillfront in general and like their current strategy. It sounds like, you know, they're steady as it goes in terms of their strategy and you know, their performance right now.
Actually, the thing that surprised me the most is they're not like for the past couple of quarters they aren't executing on their fundamental strategy or the strategy that they actually started with, which is, you know, kind of being this roll-up entity, acquire like this, you know, bunch of studios, and then like figure out like organic growth from that, but not stop with the acquisitions. I think they used to be on a rate of like one acquisition a quarter, and those used to be entire studios. Then it went to just acquiring individual games, and then the pace also reduced. It was no more once a quarter, and I don't think they have done an acquisition for like the past couple of quarters. So like their foundational strategy is, you know, basically in question. And, you know, they had this they do this capital markets day where they kind of go pretty deep into, you know, basically being like super reflective on the company and trying to be as transparent as possible to you know, the public markets about operations and how they're thinking about portfolios and things like that. And they had this one slide where they were basically saying that, you know, Stillfront is kind of in its fourth phase of its life. So the first phase was the entrepreneurial phase, which is where they kind of like set the foundation, and like these four companies came together to form Stillfront. Then it was the structure phase, which is where they kind of did their, you know, initial set of acquisitions to lay that foundation. Then it was the scale phase, which is when that like acquisition resulting in like, you know, inorganic growth flywheel was kind of spinning, and, you know, they kind of got their scale. And now it's entering the synergy phase, which is probably the most questionable phase, right? Because now you just have like, you know, you have like all these studios, and they have like the Still Ops platform, which is kind of the, you know, the meeting place for all these studios. And like it's basically like Playtika's Boost platform in a way, maybe even more expanded from that. And so they stopped acquisition, so there's no inorganic growth happening, and now they're in the synergy phase, which means there is like a lot of pressure for just organic growth at Stillfront. And the story is kind of similar to Playtika, where, you know, it's essentially going to be about, okay, so now you have all these studios, where are the new games, you know? And is it going to be like, you know, sequels to their already existing IPs? Are these teams going to build new IPs? And, you know, and then how will they like perform live ops on their existing portfolio itself? And like on that point, one last note, but I feel like that dropping DAU's problem is actually a portfolio wide issue. Not like, I mean, maybe the Bangladesh stuff actually contributed to it a bit, but their entire portfolio is also like pretty old, right? And yeah, it's just like a portfolio wide issue, which is why then you see like the ARPDAU is also kind of skyrocketing in their earnings report. So yeah, live ops, they have kind of need to focus on that. And then new games is like, again, the huge question. Can Stillfront cannot deliver on new gaming experiences? But
I have strong opinions about aggregator parent companies and being able to show organic growth.
Mhm.
I think it's incredibly hard, and it's a strategy that's almost set out to fail.
Mm.
Because first of all, they're public companies. Second, they have in the open market, they have shown these very like step function growth kind of phases, right? Especially if you're a good, you're doing smart acquisitions, you're going after profitable companies as well. So you're kind of like just aggregating revenue and profit and seeing like this accelerated growth every time you do an acquisition. And you're not positioned to wait for the part that is hard about making games, which is making good games. And that takes time, and that takes failure, and that takes investment. And these aggregators are not staffed at the leadership level to be able to stomach that. So I think I'm not sure how it's going to go down for any of these companies, but I'm very skeptical that that's going to be a good long-term strategy for any of these aggregators and massive acquirers that now have like this collection of aging games, as you said, Manu. And the other piece is the centralization of tools. It's also very, very hard. I'm also very skeptical about like the whole synergistic piece of it, of like, hey, let's make this analytics platform or this platform that just like helps all our portfolio companies. Why? Because you're acquiring live games that already have their tools and operations dialed in most of the times. So for the teams that you're asking to deliver on revenue, deliver on profit, asking them to integrate something new, it's more costly than it's worth. So
Yeah.
I think that I'm very, very skeptical of the future in terms of growth in
And we kind of saw that, like an example of that is, when Playtika acquired Reworks, and they got the Redecor game. So Redecor basically then had to like plug into Playtika's Boost platform, right, at that point. But I mean, I can't say for sure, like, okay, plugging into the Boost platform is the reason that, Redecor has been seeing declining revenues ever since that acquisition happened. But I think it would also be a little bit foolish to assume that it's not part of the reason. So it's probably a little, it's probably some part of it. So I don't know, David, like can you even speak to this at all, like with Snapshot and everything? But
I can speak in general terms.
Yeah.
Snapshot was acquired by Embracer, so that's I suppose what's behind the question. I think Tammy makes a lot of good points. I think it's worth differentiating between trying to the sort of operational integration that she's describing, which I agree is very difficult. Like, take this live game, and instead of using these tools that you've built over a period of years, integrate with this. I think it's more of an open question if you look at a company like Embracer, which is acquiring quite a diverse set of assets across a number of different areas. So in the case of Embracer, that's PC, console, mobile, it's tabletop games, it's actual
Comics.
IP, like these, like Lord of the Rings comics, exactly. And we've just been talking about the Rovio and the opportunities for Rovio and Sega. I think it's a little easier to see areas where you can leverage IP and from one context in another. Certainly not that it remains to be seen exactly how successful companies like Embracer will be. But there is certainly a lot of focus on it at the executive level at these companies. So I would say that I'm a little bit more optimistic in that kind of more loosely coupled collaboration, operational integration, than the very specific, very targeted kind that I agree is a bit like trying to kind of change out a plane's engine during flight or something, which is just really tough.
Mm.
I guess I wonder what do you do if you're a company like Stillfront or Embracer that has one of the companies you've acquired, and you're trying to shift them over to your tools or your process or whatever, make them more part of the synergy, and they just don't happen to fit, like culture wise or like personnel does want to cooperate, or it just doesn't match up. Like, do you just dismantle them? Do you just be like, do it anyways?
The answer is you can't. It sort of has to be bottom up as much as possible. So, again, without speaking too much to the specifics, there is a very clear sort of the leadership at all of the different, across the different studios, across the different entities, all have an understanding and a kind of a remit to, hey, where it makes sense, let's look for opportunities to work together, right? But you can't impose this in a top-down way, I don't think, or at least if you try, I think you're likely to fail.
Yeah, and like again, like from history, that's so true. Like I think Zynga kind of faced that quite a bit, like with their central PM function, central intelligence platforms, etc. And if it was like kind of forced on the throats of their their acquired entities, sometimes it worked out, sometimes it didn't. And the same also happened with EA, right? And so yeah, totally agree with David's point about as bottoms up as possible, and just kind of more approach it with a flexible mindset versus this is the still ops platform, you are part of Stillfront, now you have to plug in figure it out. So but yeah.
Well, in terms of growth, we actually have a company that did manage to raise some funding recently, a company called TreesPlease, raised a little bit.
Yeah, this so it's not like the largest funding round, so they raised like 8 million, but the reason I want to talk about this company is because it's part of the maybe small but interesting green gaming, that's how I call it. I don't know if that's like the that's the official industry term, but this green gaming movement where TreesPlease is a UK based game developer that is essentially building games that can actually like help reverse climate change. So there's some actual positive tangible impact to the world, apart from um, generating maximum dopamine rushes for people, but there's actual like positive impact. um, and yeah, like I said, they didn't like raise the largest round, but I wanted to kind of bring it up because it's also like one of, even though like there have been like a lot of these green gaming companies with all kinds of value propositions out there, this is probably one of the companies that's also received maybe the most significant funding round yet. um and they have like a a typical merge game, but the narrative is like super educative about climate change and like various topics around it. The business model is basically there's a percentage of IAP profits that are kind of going to their tree planting partner. I forget the name of that partner, but yeah, people have to like they do the merge game, they merge the things, they get like these tree tokens, and then once you either through like pure engagement you collect enough of tree tokens to let TreesPlease know that okay, go plant a tree, or you make an IAP purchase and there's a percentage of that profit kind of going as a donation directly to the tree planting partner, and trees are planted. they've been active, or I think the company was founded in 2019, and I think the game has been like in soft launch for a little bit over a year. But until now, they have planted 500,000 trees already, which is like significant. Um, and that's happened with like a donation amount between like 10 to 50K. So according to data.ai, they've made about like 200 to 300K in net revenue. And it would basically calculate to about 5 to 10% of the profits are going to this, this tree planting partner. The numbers are looking good, so they're nowhere close to like a merge mansion, or like a ever merge in terms of RPDs. It's still pretty far, and they probably have like some medium to long term retention problems. But yeah, it's still like good enough numbers for it to scale. So there's a large portion of the 8 million is probably just marketing firepower over here. But all those good points aside, they've planted like 500,000 trees. They found a game that actually has some numbers that you can push UA money into it, and they're giving a larger than normal percentage of their profits to this thing. All these good points aside, um, I guess my question to you guys is, we have also seen this model in the past, but not really like this. When I was working back at Zynga, they also used to do live, like they used to do some events that were charity focused, and 100% of revenue attributed to this event so directly go to the charity, right? um, but then here you have a game and a company where the purchase motivation for the IAP is directly connected to this real world impact that you can have. And somehow I feel like maybe like which model is better, because I feel like with the TreesPlease model, just to play devil's advocate a little bit, but with the TreesPlease model, somehow I feel there could be like a potential identity issue for the game, because like you have a game that's all about like creating real world impact, but to like to really hit the metrics of a merge mansion or an ever merge, like you need to be like pretty hardcore about like your free to play mechanics, right? And where do you kind of keep that balance? And I mean, maybe like still 500,000 trees is not a small number, right? And like different people have, or different entrepreneurs just have like different thresholds for what they would consider as like good impact for their efforts. But yeah, like do you guys agree with this like put identity
Yeah, I think
issue
you're
thing?
putting your I think you're putting your finger on something. My suspicion is, if you sort of want to view this through a purely utilitarian lens, like what ultimately matters is the biggest impact, the biggest positive impact possible. I'm going to start sounding like Sam Bankman-Fried, like an effective altruist here, but I agree with you. The most, if you're asking, okay, I've seen this approach. This is not the first time I've seen this, and I've yet to see it work at any scale. In fact, actually, I had a studio years ago that was actually acquired by a company that was doing this.
Interesting.
And that certainly didn't work. Anyway, I think that you're absolutely right. You have to be pretty, especially in mobile, you have to be pretty ruthless, and there is some kind of kernel of conflict there. And if you were to look at what's going to have a bigger impact, trying to kind of build a company around this, or just a game that is already at scale, doing an event where all the revenue goes to a charitable partner, I suspect that that's going to actually have the bigger impact ultimately. And it feels a little bit like you're sort of trying to have your cake and eat it, right? It's like, oh, we actually would like to make a ton of money and be a successful company, but also feel really good about it. And I kind of feel like pick a lane and just operate as effectively as you can within that lane.
Yeah,
that's my feeling.
I don't know how you feel about it, Tammy. Like, do you kind of agree with that identity issue?
I do think that there's something to be said about the identity issue. I think that where my mind went at in terms of, hey, pick a lane and just stick with it, it's more around the economics, like the very harsh economics around mobile games right now, because you do have you're 30% cut from the platforms, so that already cuts your revenue substantially. Then you're doing user acquisition on top of that. And then on top of that, you're doing, the donation to the cause that you're supporting. So that like really, really eats into your margins very, very quickly. So it makes it incredibly challenging to build a profitable and socially responsible mobile game, right? I think from like a business perspective, a little bit more zoomed out of just games, I think that there is a proven track record, at least, for example, in retail and clothing, that is incredibly hard as well, where they are trying, like there's a few companies that are trying to do something similar, like just do
Like Tom
good for the
Shoes.
planet with yeah, like, and some have failed and some have succeeded, like Patagonia and like Cotopaxi, and there's like Tentry that they also plant trees, right? So there's a proven model there, but I feel like the mobile market as it stands just makes it incredibly, incredibly hard to be able to think about both at the same time. As David said, it's just profitable game or good for the planet game. I think it's going to be very hard to achieve both.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it also comes down to the margin profile, right? Because outside of the games business, I mean, there's, like I mentioned, like Tom Shoes, where basically their value proposition is you buy a pair of Tom Shoes, and for every pair you buy, there is, one child in the world who doesn't have shoes who will also get a pair of shoes, and the price of the shoe bakes in the cost for producing that other pair, but. And that's like a completely different margin profile, and therefore it's also a model that maybe works out there, but I feel like maybe there's like some inspiration taken from those models, which is kind of trying to be applied to the TreesPlease setup. But yeah, I mean, there's a 30% cut, there are like user acquisition costs, and then on top of that you want to give away like 10% to charities and stuff. And finally, like, you can't also get like super hardcore with your free to play mechanics, because then the game doesn't feel right. you know so
I think like that is a very like a key point about this type of model. And now it's not a one-to-one, but what we're doing at my current company at Captain TV, we are kind of have a free-to-play model where we do a rev share with content creators, with streamers. And it's a pretty high rev share. The difference is we are not on mobile, so we don't have kind of that cut, and we don't have like crazy acquisition costs either. But the piece that really stood out to me right now, what you said, Manu, is we see that our players are very, very excited to support the content creators. So in this case, I think that you can find a spot where you can see players be very, very excited and willing to support the cause that the game is supporting, and be an excellent way of monetizing and reaching like really good monetization levels. But what we see because of that is that players are very allergic to that traditional pinch of free to play games. So they're like extremely happy with, cosmetics support, like spending on cosmetics and kind of that, just let me play, I'll support the cause, I'll buy cosmetics, don't pinch me.
Yeah.
And that I think like that's where there's a potential conflict.
Well, I guess we'll have to watch and see how they do, right? Keep an eye on their revenue and stuff like that. So yeah, but at least it's for a good cause, even if it doesn't last long.
Yep.
But speaking of potential conflicts here, we've got Sony versus Microsoft. The battle for the ages continues here, especially on Sony's side.
Yeah. So Sony just reported their financial results for Q3 of fiscal 2022, and the headline is their performance has been extremely strong. I think their gaming segment saw a 53% year-on-year increase, and that really was driven by both higher hardware sales, and which I think is really because supply constraints have been easing, and then also sales of first-party software, notably God of War Ragnarok, which is now at 16 million copies, I believe. PlayStation Plus is relatively stable at about 47 million subscribers. So they're doing incredibly well. And this, I think, is contrasted by some of the quite public struggles that Microsoft has had recently. The most notable being the underwhelming launch of Redfall, which obviously was a first-party title from one of Bethesda's internal studios, Arcane, and then also there was Phil Spencer has been out on the interview circuit, kind of talking about some of the challenges that they've had recently. I thought it would be sort of interesting to zoom out a little bit and just talk about the dynamics of this from a kind of strategic perspective. I'll give you my kind of headline analysis of it, and then we can kind of dig into what the execution has looked like. So I think you could say, and I'm going to use some of the terminology here. I'm going to talk about powers, and that's just reference to there's a book by Hamilton Helmer called Seven Powers that I think is a really fantastic book on strategy. So if I start talking about powers, that's what I'm kind of referring to. If you going into this generation, you could see the heart of Sony's strategic strength has come from kind of several powers. Probably the principal among which are owned IP and studios. So in the case of owned IP, you're talking about obviously titles like the Gear of War franchise, God of War franchise. And then you obviously have other things like Spider-Man, Last of Us, and so on. And these studios that have have established some pretty amazing pedigrees. Naughty Dog, Insomniac, Sony, Santa Monica. So they have these real sort of cornered resources and really strong brands in this owned IP. And one thing that Phil Spencer has also talked a lot about is in sort of fumbling the Xbox One generation. What that's created is, which was really the pivotal, the PS4 Xbox One generation was the pivotal one, arguably in the migration from physical media to digital libraries. And what that has done is created some significant switching costs for the people who own one console or another. And that was compounded by the differences in the hardware install base, right? So they have Sony has some real scale advantages in terms of just the number of installed. Their market share currently in terms of hardware is, I think, 45% relative to about 27% for Microsoft. So quite a significant difference. And I think if you sort of think about that being the landscape moving into this generation, I think it's sort of, you start to understand why Game Pass was such an important move. It was because I would think the way I would think about Game Pass is sort of a counter-positioning move to nullify the switching cost advantage that Sony had, right? So in other words, okay, we're going to make this big library of content that you have less relevant by giving you for a really arguably an unbeatable price, this incredible library that is just there on your console. And I think that was a really, really smart sort of strategic move on Microsoft's part. And clearly their intent was to support that move with this very aggressive acquisition strategy that they've had. So Bethesda being one of the biggest ones, and then of course their attempt to buy Activision Blizzard. And that, that's really an attempt to sort of level the playing field on this sort of cornered resource, this owned IP and studio advantage that Sony has historically had. And so I think what seems to me to be going on is it's failing in the execution, right? We've yet to see. So in terms of owned IP, the big one. The big sort of internal first party one, of course, was Halo. There've been a lot of challenges with Halo, and at 343, a lot of departures. And I think Halo Infinite was a pretty big disappointment to a lot of people. And at the same time, these acquired studios are yet to show a really, really strong title that's on the level of something like a God of War. So I suppose that's what I would be keen to get your take on. How does this analysis resonate with you? And then I guess the more interesting question, what are the moves that Microsoft could potentially take from here to sort of shift the playing field somewhat?
I could go first. I mean, I pretty much agree with your analysis, and what you when we were kind of discussing this on our Slack channel, and you mentioned that the smartest business model does not matter if the games don't exist behind it, and I think that is so true. So I mean, great, it was a great strategic move to kick off Game Pass, and I mean, no doubt about it, it's a very smart business model move. But I mean, players are going to go where the great games are, and you need to have the great games first, right? That is the core thing to solve for. And honestly, based on what you said right now about these acquired studios not kind of creating new games and such, or that, where is that next big new game? So many parallels to our conversations about right now about Stillfront and Playtika and things. It's kind of the same issue over there too. But yeah, I mean,
what it also kind of reminds me of is some of the discussion around Netflix's challenges, which was they sort of at some point became a volume player, and arguably one of the things they've been less successful at is creating this sort of HBO, those sort of flagship style shows that, I mean, they've obviously had some, in Squid Game and things of that nature. But I think with these subscription services, volume is great, but you need that headline. You need the stuff that is the actual reason that people are going to come and stay subscribed. And I think just the execution has been lacking.
Yeah, I was going to say that you touched on a good point, David, on the subscription models. I was actually diving into the Netflix and just subscription, TV subscription and streaming services in general, how they categorize their catalog, and I think it can very much be applied similarly to games that are trying to go after subscriptions, and it's exactly what you were saying, is that you need the headliners, they have their tier, top tier content that is going to acquire them users. Why? Because it's being talked about, et cetera, et cetera. And then from there, they have their kind of filler content, that it's quality content that they have there for you to jump right after you finish that show that you just kind of came in to watch. There has to be relevant and similarly kind of good overlap of interest of second tier filler content. And then they have the back catalog, which in the gaming space, I would say you have your AAAs, you have kind of all these smaller indie games that are very quick to play through, etc. And then your back catalog is all these ports, which you see, Microsoft is doing a bunch of ports over right now. You look at their roadmap of quote unquote new games for 2023, and I think out of 10 that they announced, half of them are remasters or ports, so it's not really new games. And I think there's this big question mark about what are those headliners that are actually going to be growth drivers.
I mean, the other thing that's interesting here is the thing we haven't mentioned yet is the PC platform. which is it's slightly ironic that if you look at the history of Microsoft, they have been they were extremely successful at leveraging their ownership of the operating system to gain strategic advantage in the market broadly, right? They did this in browsers. They did this in with Office. We're able to take this ubiquitous platform and really push it. Ironically, in games, you could argue that the company that has benefited most from that has been most successful in establishing kind of network effects and scale on PC is actually Valve, it's also I think notable that the regulatory environment is much less hospitable today to the kind of, and this is even Microsoft they were obviously very high profile Justice Department lawsuits and stuff around anti-competitive practices in the 90s. But I think it's slightly ironic. It's worth asking the question, I suppose. The more interesting thing is worth asking the question. Obviously, Microsoft is a bigger business than Sony or Nintendo, right? They're a massive, massive company. They've got huge businesses in cloud. They've got, obviously now they're becoming a big player in AI through their stake in OpenAI. I think it's ironic that their ownership of the PC platform. The other reason to note this, by the way, is that Activision Blizzard also reported results recently, and they reported that they are currently making more money on PC than they are on console. Yep. Which arguably makes this acquisition going through even more valuable to Microsoft. But I suppose my question is, what's the role of PC in all of this? And then are there other levers that Microsoft can pull to shore up their position here? Yeah.
I guess you also shared this article on the Slack channel where it was like a Forbes piece written by somebody, and I think one of his key points was there's a ceiling to this subscriber base.
They've been stagnant for Sony's been stagnant, I think, about 45 million subscribers for a couple of years now. The last time we had reports on Microsoft on Game Pass was January 2022.
Yeah. And I wonder if PC and Microsoft's hold of PC market share across the world is that lever to break that ceiling in like a 10-25x fashion, because I mean, at the end of the day, like Phil Spencer said on his interview, on what is it, on this YouTube channel, I forget what it's called. I mean, he said that we're not in the business of out consoling anybody.
Right.
It's about like giving access to the best games to all the people in the world, and they can play it with their friends. I mean, I completely butchered the mission statement of but that's kind of the point. And yeah, I mean, PC of course would play like a huge role in that, and they don't really care if it's like if you are accessing Game Pass on the Xbox or on a PC or whatever, as long as you access the Game Pass. And so yeah, I mean, I don't know what you think about that, like in terms of what role PC has to play in the overall longer term Game Pass strategy. But yeah, I mean, even that doesn't matter if the games aren't there. So, still comes back to that point a bit.
Yeah. I have
and also what are the biggest game and the biggest PC games? Many are they're owned by Valve and Activision.
Yep.
I think I have kind of interesting perspective on the PC side as a gamer that doesn't own an Xbox but does own the Game Pass, and was like a big cloud gamer as well and stuff like that. One interesting aspect of the way they handle Game Pass is kind of weird on PC. So like on PC, like a lot of people go to console sometimes because they don't want to deal with having like the high-end PCs or dealing with the PC aspect of like managing stuff. But the Xbox stuff somewhat comes with Windows, right? So like a lot of people already have access to that stuff. And a lot of people don't even realize if they have a Game Pass from their Xbox, that also does something for them on their computer and on their phone. A lot of people don't even realize that exists, right? So some of that's like a lot of times just not good marketing on their part. But the other thing is the kind of weird dynamic they have on PC when it comes to treating it like a PC or treating it like console. So on the PC side, if you want to play stuff that's a cloud game, it's all on Xbox servers, and they force you to use an Xbox controller. You used to be able to use third-party controllers, like I ironically would use a Stadia controller, but then they started enforcing Xbox controllers only for the thing to play the cloud games on there. So if you wanted to play a game with a keyboard and mouse, you had to actually install the game. So you had to download it. So that kind of took away some of their advantage of like saying like, hey, I've got a low-end PC, and that's why like I'm playing on console because my PC's not great. Oh, it'd be great if I could actually play that game on my computer. But like, if I want to play that now, all of a sudden I've got to hook my Xbox controller up to my computer to then be able to play that. So I feel like they've done a bad job, like taking advantage of the advantages they do have on there. I know they're working towards fixing that to eventually make it so that you can use keyboard and mouse. But they have that whole issue of like, oh no, you're playing on Xbox servers. So then you're like kind of a cheater. And so they're in this weird middle ground that I think they could fix. And I saw Google make tons of mistakes in this direction with Stadia that I think Microsoft has a unique position to leverage if they could just stop kind of fumbling over themselves to decide, are we a PC company or an Xbox company? And they could compete with Valve because Valve doesn't offer anything on cloud. And there are exclusives and things like that. Like there's an opportunity to make a dent here that they're just kind of missing out on, at least my perspective as a PC gamer.
Somehow I would like take the more like optimistic, long view on that and say that they're probably moving in that direction. And yeah, it's just like operational inefficiencies at the moment that's kind of, resulting in all of that. Anyway, like games are, moving to like a cross platform world in general. And, it just doesn't make sense to be like locking, game access to like a single controller and stuff. Like, but yeah, I guess I would still be like pretty optimistic they're moving in that direction. But yeah,
a lot of opportunity. And I guess we'll see what the future of that stuff is, if cloud even matters, or if it's just can they succeed on PC? Can they win on console? I think a lot of question marks over this next year, especially after the poor execution of games like Redfall and stuff like that. And then Starfield, who knows when Bethesda delivers, that kind of stuff. So I think it'll be an interesting year, and we'll definitely keep an eye on it. But deep topic, David, and I'm sure we'll be touching on it again. Lots more to say.
I have like one last question.
Sure.
Maybe David, like you thought about this, or even Tammy, but do you think like one of the things that's also kind of going around in the industry is the business model decision with Game Pass is it's not going to be the best thing for developers because it completely changes the economics of it. And I was wondering, like, we kind of see this play out on the Spotify side of things, where essentially the creators and artists are marginalized in terms of their profiting off of their like creative output. Do you kind of see like parallels with the Game Pass also, or does it work differently over here? Are these industry voices right in they saying that Game Pass is actually bad for the gaming industry longer term?
It is bad for developers, and like it's definitely better for developers. A world where Microsoft is unable to acquire Activision Blizzard is a much better world for game developers.
Strong words, quickly said. But yeah, definitely an interesting topic as well. Like I think a lot of this stuff has a lot of evolution still happen. So I think we'll definitely be revisiting this as it sort of develops through the year, especially heading towards, of course, the Christmas season when games really heat up, of course. But I want to thank everyone for coming today. A lot of great topics, a lot of cool stuff to talk about. And I'm sure lots of topics we'll be revisiting. But thanks again, everyone, for tuning in. I also want to remind everyone quickly about the mailbag. Make sure to shoot us over any feedback, mail, whatever you have, comments, anything funny, whatever, over to podcast@naavik.co. And we'll make sure to try and include that in the show here. But thanks, everyone. And especially thanks to you, listener. And we'll see you next week.
If you enjoyed today's episode, whether on YouTube or your favorite podcast app, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, or give a 5-star review. And if you want to reach out or provide feedback, shoot us a note at podcast@naavik.co or find us on Twitter and LinkedIn. Plus, if you want to learn more about what Naavik has to offer, make sure to check out our website, www.naavik.co. There, you can sign up for the #1 games industry newsletter, Naavik Digest, level up your insights with our premium research platform, Naavik Pro, or contact us to learn about our wide-ranging consulting and advisory services. Again, that is www.naavik.co. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.